Invite all the panelists to come up, or all the speakers, and we're going to go through questions from the audience. If you have questions that you would like all of them to address, I have a couple questions that I will start off with, and then we'll go from there. And again, first, I would just like to give another round of applause to our speakers because they traveled long distances, and we really appreciate them. They did a great job. So one of the things I'm curious about as you have been working on these tools and passing them is the local politics that you've seen around the adoption of the tools and later, and maybe when people finally heard about it. And can anyone volunteer to start talking about that, how they dealt with the politics around the tool?
So our politics changed drastically in November of last year when we had an election for city council. Business council to a still, cognizant of business council, but actually pro-involvement council. So the cap was adopted, as I said, under circumstances where but when I was briefing the council about the ordinances, they actually said, well, can we offer incentives? Can we offer rebates? What about all these other kinds of things? So our climate has changed significantly. So I'm looking forward to learning about all the stuff you guys are doing because we might have a window to start doing that more.
Regarding reach codes in Davis, I actually normally have to try to put the brakes on. We can only go so far. We can only do what's cost effective, and so it's actually really to promote reach codes.
City of San Jose, there's a ton of historically consistent. I think that in the last 5 years, the city overall kind of had a realization that we were starting to run the risk of losing out on a lot of opportunities, whether that be grant opportunities or otherwise. So through that, we, like I said, developed a climate action plan, and actually really was to see if our council was willing to actually take like regulatory action on it. Previously, we had some sustainability goals around them. So we've been really pleasant. Still, I think one of the biggest priorities. Have been really helpful, but it have started to self-propel itself in politics for less than a year.
To add, I think that but it's kind of interesting to see it visually. When we have meetings in Southern California or even in San Luis Obispo last week, SoCalGas will often question their workers and have that be a very uncomfortable situation for everyone. I think it's something we all should be aware of and prepared for. SoCalGas has also created front groups and gotten cities to sign on, often kind of behind the scenes without a public process, to a we don't like electrification type ordinance. So that's definitely happening. I don't know how much power it will have. It's a lot of one company trying to scramble and get a bunch of stuff done, and it creates the appearance of massive backlash. In some cases, they've done a really good job of that. In some cases, it really falls flat. Definitely, the political force in the room is not to be underestimated. And I would also say, even the head, one of the leaders of WISPA, the lobbying group, literally said in a conference a few weeks ago that this movement in California is dangerous and that we need to get in front of it and that we need to talk about all these happy fuzzy things that their industry offers so that they can counter the types of things that we're doing. So they're preparing, and the oil industry, in addition to the gas industry, has a lot of money and capacity to put behind these things. So we see it in Sacramento all the time. We definitely see it in Southern California. In Northern California, it's less prevalent, but don't be unprepared is what I would say on that one.
Great. And the two that are working on reach codes, have you seen lots of support behind that, and lots of, has that been what seems like an easy process? I know, Ariel, you just finished, and Greg, you're in the midst.
I'm going to be bringing a reach code to council on the 24th. And we had a public outreach meeting, and it was attended by all supporters. I didn't have one single person stand up and oppose it. We did extend the invitation to developers, contractors in town, and they just didn't show up. Um, as I said, we've had REACH codes in place since 2008, so they're just used to it. This is what you have to do in Davis, and we're also fortunate in that we can kind of fly under the radar. We don't have any of the major builders who come to work and build homes in Davis. It's mostly local developers and contractors who are familiar with the requirements in Davis. So.
And what's your REACH code covering?
It is going to require for mixed fuel homes 9.5 total EDR margin, and we're incentivizing all electric homes by not requiring any additional energy efficiency requirements for all electric homes. And we're also requiring in mixed fuel homes that they pre-wire for future retrofits of all gas.
Just going to mention when we were doing our outreach, the development community, BIA, and all, they were in a group. They would all say, "This is horrible." You spoke to them individually, though. They admitted that they see the market going this way. They see the state codes going this way. In the non-residential sector, we've got some folks that say we're putting in EV charging, whether you can ask us for it or not. We're putting in PV because that's what our clients do. So don't be hesitant if a says don't do this, because individually they're probably happy because they have an excuse to tell their financiers and stuff like that they need to include it in the project.
Note that the California Building Industry Association heavily supported Sept, and we work with closely on a number of issues. They explicitly say we see the writing on the wall, right? And it's a huge construction industry in California. There's tons of demand right now. There's a lot of dynamics, but they actually see that this is the future. And the leading so there's momentum there. Again, you don't need to be afraid necessarily of builders. There among many.
Additional piece of the thing that weren't necessarily opposed to the concept and then they're just asking us to get opponents in the room to just play devil's advocate. And sometimes we actually have a hard time finding people who can provide that.
Great. So switching gears a little bit. So how can local governments encourage energy efficiency without creating a significant cost burden for low and middle income property owners and residents? And thinking about this, you all touched on some of the programs that are available. We've just seen, and heard, and I think we talked about it at our last forum, how it's hard for lower middle income residents to access those. Do any of you feel like you've done anything successful? And maybe Candace and Marion, you see the landscape changing in a positive way where there's more opportunities available and more outreach to reach those groups?
There's at basically all levels of government in California, there's an acknowledgement that we have to help low-income families and low-income communities first. Just as an example, in 1477, a minimum of the percent of low-income are going to start to both be expanded and offer electrification measures. They're thinking through. I think we need to do a lot more in terms of funding available to low-income families and low-income buildings. So that's something we're thinking about, is like, how do we get much larger pots of money for this? In a few weeks, you'll see there's a few papers coming out. This is just like a heads up. There'll be a paper released tomorrow that talks about the gas infrastructure transition and the need to think about low-income residents as part of that transition. If we aren't putting first, there is the threat that they could get less on the gas system and have much higher rates than they could afford. So there's this like equity and planning piece to this too that we really have to take seriously. And I think what that points to for us is more money and more emphasis on low income first. There'll also be another report that Energy Efficiency for All and Greenlining is going to be releasing first thing in October around an efficient electrification framework. So people are starting to think about this. What does it mean to do this right? How do we actually engage and partner with local communities and not just like throw things at them? Like, here's your actually partner with folks and figure out like what they need. There's a lot of groups on the ground who already have deep relationships with many community members. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for this, but I think it has to like come first wherever possible. And I think a lot of the other parts of the market can sort of ramp up and get up to speed and pay for a lot of some of this stuff themselves. Something to keep in mind in terms of emphasis.
We're trying to keep in mind is in the long game of how we can use green leasing for benefit in situations like this. We don't necessarily have a quick fix right now, but we want to start encouraging those conversations.
This isn't a low-income program, but SMUD is offering crazy for switching over to electric. They only provide electricity, so to switch over from a gas water heater to a heat pump water heater, they're giving $3,000. They're giving $1,000 just to switch from electric water heater to a heat pump water heater. It's almost pays for it. And they have some promoting. Again, it's not low-income based.
A really cool quote yesterday that said, "Sustainability without equity is sustaining inequity." And I think a lot of folks are starting to understand that. It's a hot topic right now. The city of Oakland, they now have a racial equity department, and they are pulling in, a lot of cities are pulling in energy efficiency programs and actors in this world to contribute to that. Bayren is going to be doing a workshop in months where we're just going to talk about what equity means to us and how we can address it more intentionally. So, and that's happening a lot more. I'm really happy about that.
Great. So now I would like to open it up to the audience. If you have questions for one of the speakers or all of the speakers, Jennifer in the back has the microphone, so she will. If you raise your hand, she'll move around. Oh, good.
If you don't mind. And actually, this is for Greg and Davis. I'm leading, and Stop Waste and Bayran is leading on heat pump water heater midstream incentives program that we're doing for the 9 county-wide. And I'm jealous of your permit kind of record there in Davis, and thinking how that would be a great experiment, how easy it would be to target. If you have that much information on permitting, you can target water heaters that are near end of life in a way that the rest of us only dream of, I think. I'm curious if that's something, with your resale ordinance, it seems like an opportunity where you could, with a very interested city council perhaps, to put other elements into that resale inspection, and have you thought of those opportunities or else you might
We haven't to date, but it does make it easier to do data mining and look for properties, that are likely to replace our HVAC units and things like that. And one thing I didn't mention in my presentation, which might be, I don't know if you thought, is that although implementing a program from nothing, like we have in Davis, would be extremely challenging, especially with the real estate industry. But refining it or limiting it to HVAC change outs and water change outs where you can benefit would be much easier.
Just want to ask if folks have ideas about housing affordability. Oregon just passed a rent control law, and LA County did. And there's a lot of research that shows that low-income tenants essentially trade affordability for poorly weatherized properties. And so there's this inherent tension when we go weatherization that we're going to raise the value of the property, and then rents will go up or tenants will get evicted. And so I guess what what are best practices on this? What have folks heard about, and how do we address this if we're going to start to renovate our low-income sector?
That's a really great point. As we've started to work with more environmental justice groups, this is like one of the main things that they bring up is how do we have tenant protections? In the equitable electrification framework that will come out in October, they talk about types of rules that could go along with incentives, which include, eviction controls, essentially, rent control of various sorts that sort of have to be partnered with this, because it is a risk. You put a bunch of money, and the other thing to remember is low-income housing that is deed restricted or actually controlled legally is a very small portion of the rental market that serves low-income people. So we need to think about how to get beyond that, but still make sure that the folks actually have a place to live. So I would look at the equitable electrification framework when that comes out October 2nd as a starting place for ideas. But this has to be done sort of in partnership with the local groups that are working on tenants' rights, organizing very low-income populations. There's a lot of groups out there. So whichever city you're in, there's often going to be a group or groups that are working with these populations and have a better sense of what those people would feel comfortable with, rather than sort of our ideas. But there's some ideas that are sort of out there on the table through that framework and others.
So, I'm James Talea. I'm with Home Energy Analytics. I used to be the plug load program manager at PG&E, same group. We run a pay-for-performance program called Home Intel. But I wanted to remind everybody that, and it gets back to the question earlier about the low income. There are a lot of things that can be done that don't cost anything. So the Home Plus program from Bayren has some giveaways and things that are free, and a home energy advisor that helps all customers understand things before they even, they can look at the rebate program. The Home Intel program also is a free program that you need. So these are programs that are available, particularly to get at all the stuff inside of a house, all the plug loads, which is the largest, fastest growing energy use or electric in the home. So people can save a lot of money from a lot of things that don't cost much, if anything, because that just involves timers, smart strips, replacing light bulbs. There's a ton of available savings for low income and everybody else through programs like the Home Plus, some elements.
Yeah, great. And I think to Marion's point, it's making sure that we're maybe communicating with the right groups to get that information out to those people who need it. Yeah, Jenny.
More of a comment, and I hope that I'm not at all interpreted. My comment's not as should have set aside, but wearing my Bay Area hat, there's a lot of need in the Bay Area, and a large segment do not qualify for the state definitions of low income. I think that's really just walk outside the door and you can see that there's significant need, but because of different definitions, we're really excluded. So James mentioned our Home Plus program that targets one of those very left out segments. It's just a concern with set aside other large left out.
Other questions? Oh, one in the back.
Thanks. I'm Kristen Heinemeier with Frontier Energy. I've got a question for Greg. The city of Davis is in a wonderful position that you've got a database of every receptacle in every home in the city that's developed over 4 years. I know a lot of people here would probably love to start a program like that, but they yet, and that obviously would make it much more difficult to operate an ordinance. And earlier when I was talking with you, you said back in the 70s when they implemented it, they started out with a simpler program, and as you developed a more detailed database, it got more and more comprehensive. Do you have advice for other communities that are thinking about some kind of a program like this, about how they might start off with smaller chunks and develop that database?
The advice that I would have would be to engage the real estate community from the very beginning. It's a difficult and very loud, they have a loud voice. And they really have no interest in any other restrictions being put on So engage the real estate community. Try to demonstrate how this could possibly be a benefit for the buyer, and also one of the things that the real estate community in Davis enjoys is limiting of their disclosure liabilities, because we go in and there's disclosure items that has any work been done on the house without permit, and everyone it hasn't. I don't know what type of work requires permit, but we go in there and actually take care of that disclosure. And so there are benefits to the real estate community. I guess my recommendation would be to start small. Identify what are the key things that you want to go after, like HVAC changeouts, and start there, and then expand the program, as you gain community.
Out there, related to some of the work in the overall housing market in the Bay Area, specifically in the single-family market, the profit margins are so high that one thing that you can use to your advantage, because you're not cutting into the profit margins, essentially a huge leverage to the that might have cost.
Great. Any other questions for our panelists? Oh, okay. One more. Oh, just a sec.
I had a question about that, follow-up on that last point. Um, if, say, a developer or a real estate agent wants to complain that potential, did you have any particular rebuttals that you practiced, statistics you would bring out to demonstrate that was not the case?
And on that really quick, there have been ideas floated in Davis to have a time of sale energy efficiency ordinance. And it's challenging to say, so the person who's selling this house should include improvements, energy efficiency improvements. They're going to cost money, and they're not going to enjoy any of the benefits for it. And so one of the problems I think that we would run into if we tried to do that is that the owners are going to do the cheapest, crappiest job they can to comply with code. It is not going to be quality work. They're just going to try to spend as little money as they can, buy minimally with the requirements. So it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge to require time of sale energy efficiency.
So I have a question on the speech codes that are in Menlo Park's ordinance. They cited Sonoma Clean Power has been offering very generous incentives to go all electric. Have taken an extra $5,000. So they decided they needed to require all electric with some exception, rather than incentivize it with the mixed fuel option plus the compliance margin. I'm curious what you all think about that. Are we really going to incentives?
I think it comes down to public outreach and information, because most people aren't going to care how you heat your water as long as you have water. Most people aren't going to care how you heat your house as long as your house is heated comfortably. It really seems to me cooking. People want gas cooking because they know that's their best. And I think we just need to show them or demonstrate somehow that induction cooking. I felt the same way. I wanted to convert to a gas stove, so I installed an induction stove. Fumes. I think that's the minimum.
So Menlo Park made an exception for gas. They required all electric, but they made an exception for gas. Is that what you recommend?
So I think it's unfortunate then, because then you're not realizing the benefit of not installing gas infrastructure. So to developers, there's a benefit that is not tied throughout development. So allowing them to use gas cooking. I mean, I guess if that's how you get there, it's okay, but it's really not maximizing the benefits of all electric housing. I think we really need to inform the public that induction cooking works better, it's healthier for you, it's more efficient. Also, there are also myths out there that heat pumps don't work when it gets really cold, and that may have been true 20 years ago.
That I don't think that the example of fire rebuild is the best case for saying, like, is this going to be appealing to people? There's so many people just desperate to rebuild, and those builders may not even have an idea of how to do all electric. So I don't think the stats from a fire rebuild are necessarily relevant. However, I do think some sort of strong requirement and lots of incentives and pushing towards electric is required, just because it means a change on the part of builders in terms of their business practices, their designs, their engineers need to change a few things. It requires some effort, so they do need a big push. I also think, and this is from conversations with the builders in California, that money is nice, but they like other things too. So for example, if you can speed up approvals of development that are all electric, that's going to be really appealing. If you can speed up electric interconnection for folks that are all electric, that's going to be extremely valuable. A couple weeks makes a huge difference for builders in terms of how much money that they're able to make on a project. We're also looking at the subsidies around line extensions for gas versus electric in the state, and I think we can hopefully change that a bit so that electric line extensions are perhaps subsidized more and gas line extensions are subsidized less. So we need to look across all the levers that we have and make all electric building like the best possible idea, especially in a state where we've built mostly mixed fuel for the last 50 years. And so looking at the tools that local governments have available to you, especially around approving developments, anything you could speed up in terms of permits, is going to be very powerful and helpful in addition to any money that builders can get.
Great. Okay, last question, Kellen.
And yeah, that's for Marion. I kind of wanted you to touch on, I know a lot of what you guys are doing is kind of building infrastructure and, pathway for this to happen. But what about market demand and, people's attitudes? To Greg's point, I forgot the name of this study or piece of reporting that, gas cooking is something that people are emotionally connected to, and a lot of, the fossil fuel industry kind of knows that. People don't really care about, water heating or space heating, but they are, for some reason, invested, maybe not rationally, into gas cooking. So I wonder if you had any insights into, market demand on the consumer side, or who should maybe take up that mantle?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll say a few things. One is that the utilities in the state, as well as others, have done some really good market research on this. And what you do see is a few passionate people, not everyone caring about this, but a few passionate people, and that really does make a difference in terms of opinions. The research also shows that once people try something like induction or know someone who has, they tend to change their opinions pretty quickly. Most of us just don't have any experience with that, and they imagine like going to our grandmother's house. Maybe she lived in a rural area or in another state where she had like an old coil top. And so we have to both have experiences with new products, as well as realize like not everyone is resistant to this. I also think forcing people on this topic is probably not the right thing politically today. And in some places we may be able to do that, and where there's an opportunity, great. But we don't need all cooking in the state to change in 5 years to win this fight. So we need to pick our battles appropriately. We don't need to freak people out and basically say we're taking your stove away if that's really like deeply rooted in their hearts. Like, let their neighbors have some experiences with it first, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, this induction cooktop is super awesome. That's and it's so it might not be the fight to pick everywhere. The other thing is the Building Decarbonization Coalition, of which we are a part, is doing some marketing around cooking, around induction cooking, as well as around the health impacts of gas. So if you're not part of the Building Decarbonization Coalition, you can look up their website. That's a good group to join, because there will be marketing materials, messaging, et cetera, to do consumer education, which I agree is really important. But again, like, if we don't win that fight in 5 years, I'm okay with that across the state. Like, it's good to pick it somewhere and to show the products. But you know, one of the most powerful arguments that SoCal Gas has brought against our campaigns is to have the Culinary Institute of America be like, we're against this. This is terrible. And we can say, well, the French laundry is all electric, you know, and that's starting to like change the way people are thinking about it. But it's going to take some time for that to percolate through, like, people don't think about energy every day.
Brad on my team again. The city of San Jose has a electric stovetop checkout program. So if you're interested in that, let us know.
Great. Any other last thoughts from the panel? Okay. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your time with us today. It was really great to have you all.